Do you remember the first time you watched Grease? Not just the songs, but how it made you feel. For many of us, it wasn't just a movie. It was a time capsule. A world where summer romances lasted forever, leather jackets fixed heartbreak, and high school felt like the most important place on earth. But looking back now, decades later, doesn't it feel almost unreal? Released in 1978, Grease wasn't really about the 1950s. And it certainly wasn't about teenagers. It was about how adults remember youth, polished by nostalgia, fantasy, and a little denial. So today, let's take a closer look, not at the songs you already know by heart, but at the strange truths behind the scenes. What went wrong? What almost didn't happen? And why does this movie still work after all these years? High school. According to people who'd already lived real life. Here's a question worth asking right away. Did any of these teenagers actually look like teenagers? Even in 1978, the answer was obvious, and nobody cared. Hollywood wasn't chasing realism. It wanted performers who could sing, dance, hit their marks, and survive long shooting days without parents on set. That meant casting experienced adults and dressing them up as kids. And the most famous example? Stockard Channing. Stockard Channing's Rizzo, too old, or perfectly right. Rizzo was written as a sharp-tongued, world-weary 17-year-old. Stockard Channing was 33. On paper, that sounds absurd. But emotionally, it's exactly why Rizzo works. Her sarcasm doesn't feel like teenage rebellion, it feels earned. Her confidence doesn't wobble. Her pain feels real. Could a real high schooler have delivered that level of emotional complexity? Probably not. Channing didn't act jaded. She brought life experience into the role. And without it, Rizzo might have been just another stereotype instead of one of the most memorable characters in the film. And she wasn't alone. When hair dye and crayons held the illusion together. Jamie Donnelly, who played sweet, awkward Jan, was nearly 30, and already going gray. Her solution wasn't a stylist's miracle. It was far more practical. Every morning, crew members colored her roots with black crayon to keep Jan looking like she belonged in homeroom instead of a school pickup line. Even the leads were pushing the illusion. John Travolta was 23, young enough to sell it. Olivia Newton-John was 29, and deeply worried she couldn't. She insisted on a screen test just to confirm Sandy wouldn't look like someone attending her high school reunion rather than prom. Looking back now, doesn't it feel obvious? And yet, we believed it. Because Grease wasn't high school as it was lived. It was high school as remembered, years later, softened by time and longing. The teen angel who almost was Elvis Presley. Let's pause for a moment and imagine something different. What if the teen angel, the glowing, descending voice of reason in Beauty School Dropout, had been Elvis Presley? Because that was the original idea. Elvis wasn't just considered. He was seriously discussed. Think about what that would have meant. The man whose swagger inspired Danny Zuko, returning as a literal angel, warning a confused kid about throwing his life away. The theater would have erupted. But by 1977, Elvis was in poor health. Whether it was his condition, the size of the role, or decisions made by those around him, he declined. He died on August 16, 1977. And here's where things turn eerie. According to director Randall Kleiser, the news broke on the same day the cast was filming the slumber party scene where Rizzo sings about fear, regret, and vulnerability. The mood on set shifted instantly. Everyone knew. The moment felt heavy, almost surreal. Instead, the role went to Frankie Avalon, the clean-cut icon of 1960s beach movies. And honestly, he fit the Grease fantasy perfectly. Still, every time that scene plays, don't you wonder what it would have felt like to hear Elvis sing those words? The Sandys who almost changed everything. Sandy feels inseparable from Olivia Newton-John now. But she wasn't the first, or even second, choice. And each alternative would have reshaped the entire movie. Marie Osmond walked away, and she wasn't wrong. Marie Osmond was at the top of the list. America adored her wholesome image. She was perfect on paper. So why did she say no? Because she hated the ending. Osmond believed Sandy changing herself for Danny sent the wrong message to young women. In her view, he should have changed, not her. Was she wrong? That debate still hasn't ended. If Osmond had accepted, Grease might have become a far cleaner, more traditional musical, with far less edge and far less controversy. Carrie Fisher. Sandy with an attitude? Then there was Carrie Fisher. Director Randall Kleiser knew George Lucas from college and wandered onto the Star Wars set while it was being finished. He saw Fisher on screen, but couldn't tell if she could sing. "All I could see was the hair," he later admitted. Can you imagine Sandy Olsen with Princess Leia's confidence? Rydell High would have felt very different. Why Olivia Newton-John won, and changed the script. Olivia had one big obstacle: her accent. She couldn't master an American one convincingly. So instead of replacing her, the filmmakers rewrote Sandy as Australian. That one decision, made out of necessity, gave the character an extra layer of vulnerability. And John Travolta fought hard for her, calling her every guy's dream. History snapped into place. The song that didn't exist, until it had to. Here's something most fans don't realize. Hopelessly Devoted to You almost wasn't in Grease at all. The original stage musical didn't give Sandy a solo. But Olivia Newton-John wasn't just an actress, she was a recording artist. Her contract required a solo moment. There was only one problem. The song didn't exist. Midway through production, her producer John Farrar wrote what would become one of the film's emotional anchors. A heartbreak ballad that sounded like the 1950s, but felt like the late 1970s. By the time it was ready, filming had already wrapped. So Olivia returned alone. That's why Sandy is by herself in that backyard. Not by design, but by scheduling reality. Hair, makeup, lighting, all recreated hastily. If you look closely, Sandy doesn't look quite the same as earlier scenes. And yet, that quiet moment became the heart of the film. It earned Grease its only Academy Award nomination. It turned Olivia into a crossover superstar. And it became a staple of every revival afterward. All because of a contract clause. A carnival finale built on chaos and adrenaline. The finale feels massive, joyful, effortless. It wasn't. Producer Alan Carr rented an actual traveling carnival and dropped it onto a high school football field. The cast arrived to find real rides, real crowds, and total confusion. They had rehearsed We Go Together. That part was ready. But Danny and Sandy's final duet? You're the One That I Want arrived at the last minute. Choreographer Pat Birch had roughly 20 minutes to stage the entire funhouse sequence. The cast heard the song for the first time on set. That excitement you see. It's real. Meanwhile, Eddie D. Zen, Eugene, was strapped into spinning rides take after take. When filming ended, he stumbled away and vomited in a nearby field. That's the glamour. When a musical became a test of endurance. What if the happiest movie you remember was made under conditions no one should have endured? What if that shine, that energy, that joy on screen wasn't performance at all, but survival? Because behind Grease's bright colors and catchy hooks was a production that pushed its cast to physical limits few audiences ever imagined. Let's start where the smiles were widest, and the suffering most intense. The dance floor that nearly broke them. The iconic dance competition looks effortless, youthful, electric. But the reality was brutal. The sequence was filmed during a historic California heat wave inside a gymnasium with no air conditioning. Add production lighting, thick costumes, layers of makeup and hairspray, and dozens of bodies packed together. Temperatures climbed as high as 116 degrees. Now here's the part no one talks about. Just outside that gym sat a slaughterhouse. When the crew opened windows for air, the smell poured in. The choice was simple: breathe and gag, or suffocate quietly. The shoot lasted 5 straight days. Actors collapsed from heat exhaustion. Michael Tucci was hospitalized for dehydration. Between takes, performers lay flat on the floor, barely moving, trying to cool down enough to stand again. So that glow on their faces? That wasn't movie magic. That was sweat from people trying not to pass out. And it raises an uncomfortable question. How much discomfort are we willing to romanticize once it's wrapped in nostalgia? The scene that should never have been filmed. The Los Angeles River looks cinematic on camera. Wide. Industrial. Dramatic. In real life, it was something else entirely. During filming, The riverbed was filled with stagnant runoff, water that had been sitting in the sun, collecting bacteria. For 3 days, cars drove through it repeatedly, spraying contaminated water onto cast and crew. People started getting sick. Director Randall Kleiser cut his foot walking barefoot on set. The next day, he had a fever. He didn't stop filming. Then there was Annette Charles, Cha-Cha. She performed her flag-waving scene while in serious pain. Unknown to most of the crew, she had checked herself out of the hospital just to finish filming. The moment the cameras stopped rolling, she went straight back. Doctors discovered an ectopic pregnancy. Emergency surgery followed. She didn't know what was wrong at the time. She only knew the scene had to be finished. That's the part audiences never saw. So ask yourself, at what point does dedication cross into something far more dangerous? The Cola War hidden in plain sight. Have you ever noticed something strange in the diner scenes? Blurry signs. Obscured posters. That wasn't an artistic choice. Coca-Cola branding was everywhere during filming, until producer Alan Carr realized he'd already signed a promotional deal with Pepsi. Reshooting wasn't an option. Too expensive. Too late. So the studio resorted to old-school optical effects, manual masking applied directly to the film negative. It was clumsy, obvious, and incomplete. Some Coke branding couldn't be removed convincingly. A red Coca-Cola cooler remained in full view. The crew simply hoped Pepsi wouldn't complain. Decades later, the 40th anniversary release digitally replaced some blurred posters with Pepsi logos. But the edits are still visible if you know where to look. 40 years later, the Cola Wars are still quietly playing out in the background of a milkshake scene. It's a reminder that even our fondest memories are shaped by contracts and compromises. Why Grease still endures. So why does Grease still work? Not because it's accurate, but because it's aspirational. It doesn't show youth as it truly was, it shows youth as we wish it had been. Louder, brighter, simpler. And maybe that's why we still sing along. Because some illusions are worth protecting, even after we understand them. Which leads to a deeper question. When you watch Grease today, are you remembering high school, or remembering yourself? The jackets that almost didn't exist. The pink ladies' jackets are cultural shorthand now. Pink satin. Names stitched proudly across the chest. But they nearly looked nothing like that. Costume designer Albert Volsky initially created outfits that leaned toward realism, muted, understated, historically accurate to the 1950s. Director Randall Kleiser rejected them outright. He didn't want realism. He wanted impact. The goal wasn't to recreate the 1950s. It was to create a fantasy version of them, bold enough to explode off the screen. Volsky scrapped the subdued designs and went all in. Bright colors. Flattering silhouettes. Rules abandoned. The pink ladies weren't meant to blend in. They were meant to dominate. And it worked. Those jackets became symbols of rebellion, sisterhood, and cool confidence. Nearly half a century later, no costume party is complete without one. Sometimes excess isn't a mistake, it's the point. The version of Grease we never saw. Grease opens with animation. A strange choice for a live-action musical set in the 1950s. That opening is a leftover from a very different vision. Before John Travolta or Olivia Newton-John were cast, the film rights were briefly held by Ralph Bakshi, the controversial animator behind Fritz the Cat, the first X-rated animated feature in U.S. history. Bakshi didn't make children's cartoons. He made adult ones. His vision for Grease was animated, dark, and deeply cynical. And according to co-creator Jim Jacobs, Bakshi's team planned a shocking ending. Danny Zuko dies by suicide. Jacobs and co-writer Warren Casey were stunned. The option lapsed in 1976. Producer Alan Carr stepped in, paid $200,000 out of pocket, and partnered with Robert Stigwood to reshape Grease into the PG-rated phenomenon released in 1978. Bakshi never let the idea go. His later film Hey Good Lookin' featured greasers, gangs, and a lead character uncannily similar to Danny. The animated opening we know today was created by a completely different team, but every time it plays, it raises an intriguing question. How different would this story feel if it had followed its darkest instincts? The song that was taken away. Greased Lightnin', feels inseparable from Danny Zuko. But it wasn't written for him. In the original stage musical, the song belonged to Kennedy, played on Broadway by Jeff Conaway. It was his car, his fantasy, his moment. Ironically, Conaway had also played Danny Zuko on stage before the film. When the movie went into production, Conaway was pushed into the supporting role while John Travolta took the lead. At least Conaway still had his signature song, or so he thought. Travolta had just finished Saturday Night Fever. His star was rising fast. He recognized Greased Lightnin' as the film's standout number, and wanted it. Conaway refused at first. Eventually, he gave in. Then came the injury. During filming, Conaway was accidentally dropped during choreography. He injured his back. Doctors prescribed painkillers. That prescription sparked an addiction that followed him for the rest of his life. On screen, the song became legendary. Off-screen, its cost was devastating. Sometimes movie magic is built on someone else's quiet loss. Not scandal. Not tragedy you see splashed across headlines. But small, private sacrifices that never make it into the credits. Grease is remembered as bright, carefree, and endlessly fun, a film that feels like summer even decades later. But beneath the smiles, choreography, and candy-colored nostalgia, its legacy is stitched together with discomfort, risk, and choices that could have gone very differently. The outfit that trapped its star. Sandy's final transformation is iconic. Black pants, leather jacket, red lips, total confidence. It's one of the most recognizable costume reveals in movie history. A moment of empowerment that generations have replayed, referenced, and reimagined. But behind that image was a reality far less glamorous. The pants Olivia Newton-John wore were authentic 1950s vintage, already decades old by the time filming began. There were no backups, no replicas, and the zipper was broken. Replacing it would have meant cutting into fragile fabric that might not survive the repair. So the costume department made a different choice. Every morning, Newton-John was sewn into the pants. Not metaphorically. Literally. Once inside, she couldn't sit comfortably. Bathroom breaks required the seams to be cut open, then stitched closed again afterward. To minimize interruptions, she limited eating and drinking, enduring long days under hot lights while performing demanding choreography. Every kick, spin, and confident strut came with the knowledge that one wrong move could split the seams and ruin the only pair. On screen, Sandy looks liberated. Off-screen, the actress was physically trapped. What does it say about movie magic when freedom is performed through confinement? And how many other iconic moments were paid for in silence? Years later, Newton-John auctioned the outfit to help fund her cancer wellness center. The leather jacket alone sold for over $240,000. The pants, still with a broken zipper, were purchased by Spanx founder Sarah Blakely and now hang framed at company headquarters. The irony is impossible to ignore. A garment that once restricted a woman's body now symbolizes empowerment, success, and reinvention. Was that transformation intentional, or did it only become meaningful in hindsight? The crown that took 40 years to fall. When Grease premiered in 1978, critics weren't impressed. They called it shallow, pleasant, and plastic. About as much substance as white bread. It wasn't prestige cinema. It wasn't trying to be. And reviewers didn't think it would last. Audiences disagreed. Made on a modest $6 million budget, Grease exploded into a cultural phenomenon. It became the highest-grossing film of the year, outperforming Superman and Jaws 2. No small feat in an era dominated by blockbusters. More impressively, it dethroned The Sound of Music, ending its 13-year reign as the highest-grossing musical in U.S. history. And then Grease refused to leave. For nearly 4 decades, no live-action musical could surpass it domestically. Not until Beauty and the Beast in 2017. Worldwide, it earned nearly $400 million, over 60 times its budget. That kind of dominance doesn't happen by accident. It happens when a story taps into something timeless. Youth, rebellion, romance, and the ache of wanting to belong. Why did critics miss what audiences instantly felt? And how often does popular culture understand something long before institutions do? The ending that still divides fans. Most movie romances end with a kiss. Danny and Sandy don't just kiss. They fly into the sky in a convertible. No explanation. No logic. Just lift off. The original stage musical never included this moment. Its ending stayed firmly on the ground, emotionally resolved but physically realistic. The film chose fantasy instead. Grease wasn't interested in realism. It was interested in feeling, specifically the feeling of escape, of summer never ending, of youth lifting you above consequences. Over time, fans invented theories to make sense of the moment. The most infamous suggests Sandy died at the beach, and the entire film is her dying fantasy. Jim Jacobs, co-creator of the musical, dismissed the idea outright. Sandy wasn't dead. The theory was nonsense. Sometimes a flying car is just a flying car. In a world where mechanics break into song and angels descend to offer beauty tips, physics was never the point. So why do we keep trying to explain it? Are we uncomfortable letting joy exist without justification? The role the Fonz refused. Before John Travolta ever snapped into Danny Zuko's swagger, the role was offered to Henry Winkler. At the time, Winkler was television royalty as the Fonz on Happy Days. But that fame was exactly why he said no. He feared being trapped forever as a leather-jacketed greaser, typecast beyond escape. That decision opened the door for Travolta, a performer who could sing, dance, and carry a musical with natural ease. His portrayal helped define the film's rhythm, charm, and emotional pull. Travolta later bought a plane. Winkler went home and had orange juice. Years later, Winkler admitted the truth. Travolta was the right choice. It's a reminder that every success story is also built on the roads not taken. How many iconic moments exist only because someone else stepped aside? Final thought. Grease looks effortless. It wasn't. It was sweat, sacrifice, compromise, fear, and chance, wrapped in melody and memory. Maybe that's why it still resonates. Because beneath the fantasy is something real, the cost of becoming who you're expected to be, and the hope that reinvention is still possible. So when you watch it again, ask yourself, are you watching a movie? Or revisiting a version of life you still carry with you? That question, more than the songs, more than the style, is why Grease still matters.